there, welcome to The Drum. I'm John Barron. Coming up tonight, Tony Abbott's judgment questioned over the political company that he's keeping at the moment on the carbon tax revolt. Should Colonel Gaddafi escape international justice if he agrees to go quietly? And we'll ask the ABC's election guru Antony Green, just how bad can it get for Labor in New South Wales? Our panel tonight: presenter of ABC's 7:30 New South Wales and host of our New South Wales election night coverage, Quentin Dempster; the former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski; and Michael Gleeson, these days with Hawker Britton. First, to the political fallout from Tony Abbott's decision to attend the anti-carbon tax rally in Canberra yesterday. His judgment has been called into question after he spoke in front of those placards abusing Julia Gillard. The opposition leader admitted that some of the language used was regrettable, but he has refused to apologise.
I think that some people went a bit over the top with their sloganeering and their placards. They shouldn't have done that. But let's not get too precious about this. The Prime Minister should not have said 6 days before the election, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead.
The Climate Change Minister, Greg Combet, condemned Mr Abbott's judgment on this matter.
Mr Abbott should dissociate himself from some of the things that we saw yesterday. They were deeply offensive, and some of those placards were despicable. But when you associate yourself as a senior political leader, as Mr Abbott did, with some of the extreme elements and the extreme expressions that were made at that rally yesterday, I think it is incumbent upon you, as a senior leader in our community, to dissociate yourself and do so clearly and unequivocally.
And that was a sentiment echoed by the Greens leader, Bob Brown, as well.
I've never stood in front of banners like Mr Abbott and his senior colleagues did yesterday, which were offensive, hateful and quite disgusting.
And the Prime Minister hit back in question time.
A hollow man,
Order.
No judgment.
Order.
Now, but instead of backing down, Tony Abbott went on the attack himself.
This is the preciousness of a Prime Minister who thinks that anyone who doesn't agree with her is an extremist, Mr Speaker. She thinks all of the people who were good enough to turn up outside of this Parliament building yesterday were somehow extremists.
Now, that word extremist, I think, would probably have to be rated as the word of the day. It was used many times against Tony Abbott, and then he turned that back on the government. Quentin, to you first of all, this extremist tag, first of all, being targeted at Tony Abbott, is it likely to stick? Is the company he's keeping going to be a problem for him?
If there are other instances, yes, it will stick. Remember Julia Gillard's recent repositioning of the Labor Party in minority now to say we're there in the middle. Tony Abbott and the climate change deniers are the extreme on that side, and even the Greens are on the extreme on the other side. So it does help Gillard reposition herself politically. Tony Abbott's a very good communicator, and I'm sure he can cut through that in due course. He does want a people's revolt, he said. Well, he's got one. Some of the people are revolting.
Kerry, we've all seen the pictures in the papers today. It's not a good look. What went wrong, and what was going through Tony Abbott's mind when one of his minders presumably came in at lunchtime yesterday and said, Tony, you've got 5 minutes to be down there, but you should know there's some pretty way out signs. Oh, and Pauline Hanson's turned up as well.
I think the Pauline Hanson bit might have unnerved him more than the signs. Look, I actually don't think he realised that he was standing in front of a sign which was quite as offensive as the one that we saw him in front of. I read in the paper today that one of the Libs who was down there with him actually asked the bloke holding that sign to take it down and tried to move him out of the way because he could see it, but Tony didn't know it was there. So they actually tried to move it because I don't think anybody in the Liberal Party was happy with that sort of signage. They didn't support those sorts of sentiments. So I think that, you know, moments, what happens...
What about personal attack? I suppose this, where are we going in Australian politics? You've been subject to personal attack.
Oh, just a bit.
You know what it's like, but is it any more extreme now than the personal attack's any more extreme than you experienced?
Well, look, I was attacked by a couple of people over the years. You know, I had people... One of them said that I needed to get a facelift. You know, why don't you go get a facelift? So that was kind of much more personal than some of the stuff. In some ways, that was very personal. And I think if you're going to go into the cut and thrust of politics, you've got to be prepared for attacks. Now, having said that, the people who, some of those comments... See, Bob Carr, you'll remember, he once accused me of putting my stiletto into the kidney fat of Peter Collins, which was a classic line at the time, but he never apologised for any of the stuff. He also accused me once of taking hormone treatment. That was why my voice was so deep. He refused to apologise about that. So they were very personal.
It can be personal, but is it worse now?
I think it's his show today. Sorry about that, Quentin.
Save it for Saturday, Quentin. Michael Gleeson, you've spent a lot of time reporting from the United States. We've seen there a grassroots movement pose potentially very much a double-edged sword to the Conservative side of politics there with the Tea Party movement. Is there a danger in what we saw in Canberra yesterday getting out of control?
No, I don't think so. And you only had to look at the numbers. I mean, that wasn't a very big crowd. Let's not forget there were 8,000 people on the streets of Melbourne campaigning for the carbon tax. You know, I mean, it made great theatre, it made great television, but I would like to have seen a helicopter shot of just how many people were there. I don't think we're seeing a grassroots movement. I think, you know, the right-wing radio stations managed to get a crowd there. But, you know, what I would say too is this goes to Mr Abbott's judgment. The reality is that he did not poll well with women at the last election, and he's standing in front of signs with that sort of language. I mean, the average woman who's watching that, how do they feel? You know, when the Prime Minister, who is a woman, is described like that, this is not going to go to his credibility with women very well.
Kerry, do different rules apply when you're dealing with a female Prime Minister for the first time? Because there were some pretty full-on signs waved at John Howard over the years.
Yeah, I think the issue is that there is a different standard, which in some ways is kind of odd, but there is a different standard. I think women, because they haven't been there in large numbers, when they start to get attacked in that way, then people do tend to react against it. I mean, I do know that when people said some stuff to me, I got quite a bit of sympathy in the media, which was nice for a change, I must say. But yeah, that sort of did work that way. The problem is that I think Julia stood up in Parliament today and she was pretty aggressive. I mean, she was giving as good as she gets. So there is almost an element of reacting to Tony, which is probably not necessarily in her best interest, because she's saying, she's pushing back as hard as he's pushing at her. And if you're going to act like that as a woman, then I suppose you're going to expect to be attacked.
I mean, he ought to be having words to his staff as well. I'd be astounded if there wasn't an advanced team that went down there to check it out first, as you were alluding to. You would go back to the leader and say, you know what, boss, I don't think we can have you there. While banners are there, we'll get rid of them before you go down. You would never have seen John Howard, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, Robert Menzies standing in front of signs like that. I mean, this bloke wants to be he's the alternative Prime Minister. I mean, now, it's outrageous.
Let's move on from the carbon tax to that other tax that has sort of gone off the radar just a little bit, the Troubled Mineral Resources Tax, Mark II, as it's now being described. It came a step closer to becoming a reality today. The government has confirmed it has accepted all 94 recommendations of the Argus Review, the policy group which examined the issue. It includes things like giving mining companies credit for all future state and territory mining royalties.
There's no doubt that reforming resource taxation has not been easy. It's been difficult. But it's a long-term, worthwhile reform, a reform that has been worth fighting for, and a reform which will bring great benefits to the Australian economy.
The changes may please the mining companies, but the Greens aren't happy, and leader Bob Brown has given notice that he won't support the amendments.
It is a wrong decision. It adds to the $100 billion being lost over the next 10 years from the public purse, which should be going to hospitals, houses, defence, schools.
Kerry, on this, now that we have seen this review process go through, we've been hearing about the sweeteners, not just for the mining companies, but also for all of us. Another 3% in our superannuation kitties at the end of our working life. Is this going to tip the balance, do you think?
Well, I think they still have to persuade the Greens, and clearly the Greens aren't happy, so I think there's a long way to go. I was intrigued to hear the Treasurer say that they're going to subsidise the royalties. They'll actually make sure that the states don't miss out. But then he went on to say that he didn't expect that the states would put up their royalty rates. Well, I think that's kind of naive. I'm not quite sure how they're going to stop them doing that, because if I'm a state premier sitting there with a very big coal resource, for example, and I was thinking, well, I know that if I put them up, the federal government's going to put it in, the back way, so why wouldn't I? I mean, they're not going to have to pay it. Why wouldn't you actually put it up? So I don't know what sort of agreement he's got from the premiers that if he goes down that route, they will behave, because I can't imagine they will.
Is the word, Michael Gleeson, tax? We have a levy, you have a tax, then there are royalties, and then there's, it seems that the words are terribly important. A price rather than a carbon tax is a lot more saleable. This is a tax, but it's not on us. Is there still going to be opposition because of that word?
Well, I can imagine, John, if the worm was running along the bottom of the screen right now, whenever you said it, you would have seen it take a dip. The fact is that it hits a nerve with the voting public. And, however, on this occasion, I think it's a defensible one, but the government, needs to make sure it gets its messaging right and makes people aware of just what it means to them and where the money that is raised by this tax is going to go. And if it goes to support people in their old age, if it goes to other useful areas that government provides funding for, then that has to be something that the government trumpets.
But you can see the next attack from the opposition will be, look, we're getting all these new taxes, we're getting all these new whatever you want to call them. We're going to have to set up all these new bureaucracies, which are going to have to work out how to administer it, because you're going to have to take money from here to put it over there and compensate the states here, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's going to be so complicated. I actually think the selling of it will, again, particularly when they're accepting 94 recommendations, is going to be very hard for the government again. And, you've already got Bob Brown saying he's not going to support it, so I don't know I don't know where they're going to go.
It's another step along the way. I think we can all just take a cold shower until they come up with something, quite frankly. I mean, this is incremental, and this is just another step. We'll wait and see where we're going in 6 months.
Quentin, in the time that it's taken Don Argus to come up with those 94 recommendations, there have been some rather fat profits announced by the big miners. Is that going to, in the political scheme of things, make a difference?
Yes, it will in public perception terms, but don't forget we had the super profits tax debate last year, and a lot of the states, in Queensland and Western Australia particularly, were very concerned about what the government was doing, and you had an argument about where the money comes as far as regional growth is concerned. What I think we're seeing is the government trying to get the cart back behind the horse, because 3 weeks ago Julia Gillard, Bob Brown, Christine Milne, all of them came out, Tony Windsor, Rob Oakeshott came out and said, we've had our committee, now we're going to impose the carbon price by the 1st of July next year, and don't worry, we're going to talk about the actual quantum of the price, and they're going to talk about compensation. Now they're trying to say, this is what we're going to do with other fundraising measures, and this is the way that we're going to restructure the economy of Australia. It's later. They've got a communications problem here in getting momentum to, which is what's meant to be the ultimate objective, and that's a downward pressure on greenhouse gas emissions.
And how important is it that we're seeing a subject on which there is furious disagreement between the Gillard government and the Greens right now?
Well, we don't have our cameras, regrettably, inside their committee. And I'm sure they are discussing how they are selling this to the public. We've already said in the previous segment, Julia Gillard's trying to reposition the Labor Party in the middle. The Abbott deniers there, the Green extremists there. So they are the objective, I think, of the Greens and Bob Brown is at the end of this process, come what may, there's going to be a price on carbon in Australia. They take the balance of power in the Senate in a couple of months' time. And that's when Australian politics will change. But it's still on a knife edge because Tony Abbott, with the support of Australian women, Michael, came within 2 votes of being the Prime Minister of Australia.
Now, not enough Australian women, Quentin.
Yeah, but, and let me just say that I read in the paper today that apparently the Greens in New South Wales, part of their election platform, is that they want to close down the coal industry in New South Wales. Now, that will go very well down with the mining.
Let's get on to the New South Wales election then. As you happen to bring it up, Kerry Chikarovski, I can't imagine why. The three of you in different capacities have probably spent more time in Macquarie Street in New South Wales State Parliament than you care to recall. It has been a long and largely uninspiring campaign, I think it's fair to say. New South Wales voters will finally go to the polls on Saturday. The Labor government is, by all accounts, facing an absolute drubbing of historic proportions, despite the often valiant efforts of Premier Kristina Keneally over the last few weeks. In the final stretch today, both leaders have been focusing on traditional ALP heartlands, and the opposition has released its election policy costings, promising that they won't add $1 of debt to the New South Wales state budget.